Ancient Rome, one of the greatest superpowers in history, whose far-reaching legacy continues to shape our lives.
For close on 1,000 years, the Romans dominated the known world. Theirs was an extraordinary empire that heralded an age of unprecedented prosperity and stability, but that also ruled through violence and oppression.
Rome's rise to greatness wasn't inevitable. Its epic history was often decided by single critical moments.
In this series, I'm exploring 8 key days that I believe help to explain Rome's remarkable success.
To understand the full significance of these 8 days, I'm travelling across the Roman world.
I am incredibly lucky to get access to this archaeological site,
examining remarkable finds.
Today, this is the kind of thing that you put on a dog, but this was almost certainly attached to a human.
And investigating the complexities of what it was to be Roman. This is the day in the summer of 73 BC when a band of slaves escaped and took on the might of Rome. They were led by one of the most legendary names in history.
What is your name? My name is Spartacus.
Rome started out in life just as a modest little village on the banks of the river Tiber, but it would rise to become the master of the ancient world.
From the 6th century BC, Rome fought to establish herself as the dominant power in Italy. Then, after her great victory over Carthage in 202 BC at the Battle of Zama, she became a Mediterranean superpower. But for millions, Rome's expansion came at a terrible price.
For Rome, the spoils of conquest weren't just territories and treasures, but slaves. By the 1st century BC, Romans depended on around 1.5 million of them. So had you been walking down these streets then, 1 in 5 of the people that you passed would have been unfree. The massive majority of these women and men were treated with absolute brutality.
The Romans were creating a problem for themselves. More conquests, more slaves, and more land for them to work. But the Romans also had a saying, you have as many enemies as you have slaves. They knew that slaves were potential insurgents, and one day, in 73 BC, their worst fear was realised.
Here in Capua, 100 miles southeast of Rome, a man called Spartacus led a group of highly trained specialist slaves, gladiators, in a desperate attempt to escape. This was a do-or-die mission that turned into a mass revolt and threw the Roman Republic into crisis.
I think this was a crucial day because it not only destabilised the Roman Republic, it shows us practically, physically and psychologically how Rome wielded power.
I want to explore the events around Spartacus's breakout, the day that spawned this legend, because I believe it can tell us a huge amount about Rome. A civilization where extraordinary wealth and abject oppression coexisted. A republic governed by elected politicians who were so panicked by Spartacus's revolt that they offered unprecedented power to a single ambitious individual who promised victory. A dark foreshadowing of Rome's slide into dictatorship.
The origins of that fateful day lie here, 700 miles away in what was once known as Thrace in southeastern Europe. By 100 BC, it was on the fringe of the Roman Empire, and according to the Roman historian Appian, this was Spartacus's homeland.
The Thracian people had a long, proud warrior tradition. There's actually a possibility that the name Spartacus is the Latin version of a Thracian word, Spartakos, famous for his spear. But according to Appian, initially Spartacus wasn't actually fighting against the Romans, but with them, probably as some kind of a mercenary.
Mike Loads is an expert in ancient warfare. Why did the Romans need to employ mercenaries?
It was a very clever thing that Rome did. As it started to expand beyond its borders, it recruited previously conquered people into its own family. Specialist troops like slingers, like archers, and especially heavy cavalry.
Why did they turn to the Thracians often for this?
They were some of the best cavalry in Europe. There's the story of one Thracian cavalryman who galloped along and decapitated a Roman with his sword as he rode by. I mean, these were feared men.
And we think that Spartacus was a mercenary. Why do you imagine things went so wrong that he ended up a slave?
Well, we can only speculate. There could be all manner of reasons. Maybe he was just a natural rebel and he talked back to officers, and it could have just been as simple as that. So who knows? But somewhere along the line, Spartacus fell from grace and he became a slave. From possibly being a high-ranking Thracian cavalry officer to being a slave. That's quite a fall.
Whatever crime Spartacus committed, his punishment, to be sold into slavery, was the start of a journey into a living hell.
Stop. Stubborn bastard. This one is trouble.
Stand!
Stand, or you shall be responsible for your friend's death. As well as your own. What is your next name? What is your name?
My name is Spartacus.
Do you know what land this is? What lies at the end of this road? Rome, your destiny.
The Romans brought Spartacus to their imperial heartland. The man who would one day lead their own slaves against them. As a slave, Spartacus was right at the bottom of Rome's strict social hierarchy. But for those at the top, life could be very good indeed.
If you'd been a slave in a wealthy household, my goodness, you'd have been aware of the disparity between rich and poor, between free and unfree. Some of the wealthiest Romans owned as many as 20 houses, and they would have been decorated with beautiful artworks like this. This was actually originally a dining room, and it celebrates the fruits of success. So you have to imagine men and women lying down here, being hand-fed, physically being waited on hand and foot every day of their lives.
What's perhaps most difficult for us to fathom is that all levels of Roman society saw slavery as part of the natural order. That there were the chances for freedom, and freed slaves could go on to achieve great things. But for the massive majority, life was unremittingly grim. There's one place where we can still get a real sense of daily life for Roman slaves. This is Pompeii. In 79 AD, it was buried under volcanic rock and ash spewed out by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. The result is an ancient town suspended in time. Slaves would often have worked and slept in small businesses like this. This is a laundry, and they'd have spent their day trampling cloth soaked in urine. In fact, they did pretty much everything. They taught children, they combed hair, they cleared up shit, they dug fields. And at night, they were often put to bed in tiny little cubicles like battery hens, or just slept rough. The fact that whipping boy was a very popular name for slaves suggests just how desperate life was for the massive majority. Once enslaved, your children were automatically born as slaves. Because for Romans being unfree was the destiny of a subgroup of the population, like being born a man or a woman, slaves were shackled by rigid prejudice as well as by their chains. We know owners sometimes took extreme measures to hang on to their property. This metal tag would originally have been attached to a collar, and the inscription on it reads, "Hold me fast if I run away, and then return me to my master Viventius on the estate of Callistus." Now, today this is the kind of thing that you put on a dog, but this was almost certainly attached to a human. You see images of them time and time again. Slaves chain-ganged together with iron bands around their neck. These would be men and women who in real life would have been covered head to foot with bruises. It is just hideous to think of the isolation of someone who wore something like this and who tried to escape, and then the retribution that would have been meted out on them if they were ever caught. We have numerous accounts of slaves slipping away at night or running off during errands, even committing suicide. Men and women who just couldn't bear the life that they'd been given. But there was a particular class of slaves who lived a uniquely nightmarish existence. These were the most extreme slaves, gladiators. Most slaves ended up doing backbreaking labour or working in households for wealthy Roman families. By contrast, gladiators were exotic and dangerous, slaves who fought and died for the entertainment of Romans. A Thracian warrior like Spartacus would have quickly caught the eye of a gladiator master.
Ah, look at him. These are from the far reaches of the empire. All fine warriors bred to fight to the death. Huh?
But at these prices, I cannot afford for them to kill each other.
Nah. Let me sell it some to kill.
From the historian Plutarch, we know that Spartacus was bought by Lentulus Vatiatus, owner of the famous Capular gladiator school in southern Italy. The start of the journey towards the fateful day of his revolt. Thanks to the excavations at Pompeii, just 25 miles from Capua, we can see what a gladiator school, or ludus, looked like. A ludus was a kind of combination of a prison and a school for gladiators,
And the open courtyard where I'm walking now is where the men would have trained. We think there are around 140 or so of them here, and they'd have fought out here during the day and then slept, 2 men to a cell, in the rooms behind me. In these places, conditions were phenomenally tough. These were men with nothing left to lose, being trained in the art of death as spectacle.
We know the name of another gladiator at the Capua Ludus, who play a key role on the day of the revolt. A Gaul by the name of Crixus.
You're smart in your last beating. Fight. I can practice smashing your head.
These 2 sparring partners, Spartacus and Crixus, would go on to form a crucial alliance, a bond between gladiators that we now think was quite common.
Rather brilliantly, we know from some inscriptions from gladiator schools like this that some slaves shared a real sense of solidarity, almost comradeship. For example, a gladiator's burial might be paid for by his familiar, his troop, or even by his doctor or trainer. This is a bit of evidence that reveals a really unexpected detail in one gladiator's life. It's from Milan, and it's the commemoration of the short life of Erdicus. Now, Erdicus was a secutor or chaser, so that's a gladiator who fights with a sword and a shield. And this inscription is written in Latin, and it's very eroded, but this is how it translates. To Erdicus, secutor of the first grade, from Florence by birth, who fought 13 times and lived 22 years. This memorial is set up by his daughter Olympias, whom he left at the age of 5 months, and Euricia, his wife, for her well-deserving husband with whom she lived for 7 years. May those who love him honour his spirit.
We now think a gladiator had about a 1 in 10 chance of dying each time he entered the arena. Not great odds. To avoid an early death, Spartacus had to somehow seize back control of his fate.
Stand, or you shall be responsible for your fell step.
Romans, for their own entertainment, were training slaves to become inventive and sophisticated killers, loyal only to their fellow gladiators. It was an explosive situation, and Spartacus began planning for a day when he could turn it to his advantage.
Tomorrow will be my equal.
If my next opponent's you, Crixus,
In that battle, go down in history.
I will not fight again for the pleasure of Romans. In here, our fate is sealed. Out there, we can make our own.
Silence.
I swear, next man I kill, be a Roman.
Μένουμε σπίτι για να φυλάξουμε τα όνειρα που περιμένουν να γίνουν πραγματικότητα. Μένουμε σπίτι γιατί είναι η ευκαιρία να γίνουμε ξανά πρότυπο πολιτισμού. Μένουμε σπίτι.
Years ago, I named the Mazanai in the Pentagon.
If I only could, that's all.
Ιεροί προσκυνηματικοί τόποι που συγκεντρώνουν πλήθη πιστών από όλο τον κόσμο. Ιερουσαλήμ, Ελλάδα, Πόρτος, Κύπρος, Κωνσταντινούπολη, ιστορικά προσκυνήματα. Από τα ωραιότερα θρησκευτικά έργα του 18ου αιώνα. Το τελευταίο του Τζοβάνι Μπατίστα Βεργολέζη, που πέθανε σε ηλικία 26 ετών. Η μητέρα του Ιησού θρηνεί το γιο της, πάνω στο σταυρό. Από το παρόχ ναό της Παναγίας στη Δρέσδη, με πυροσίδα σοπράνο, Άννα Ντετρέπκο και την κοντράλτο Μαριάννα Ριζολάτο. Μεθεωρίτες, η πολυγραφευμένη ταινία του Γιουρτζάιν Τερτέκ.
Εάν νοσείτε με ίδια συμπτώματα και παραμένετε στο σπίτι σας, μείνετε σε ένα καλά ριζόμενο δωμάτιο και θα χρησιμοποιείτε μόνο από εσάς και παρακολουθείτε την υγεία σας καθημερινά, σε τακτική επικοινωνία με τον γιατρό σας. Εάν φροντίζουμε ασθενείς στο σπίτι, κρατάμε 1 με 2 μέτρα απόσταση. Τα αντικείμενα του ασθενούς, μετά το σχολαστικό πλήσιμο, μπορούν να χρησιμοποιηθούν ξανά. Τα λεγμένα ρούχα, τετρέπες, τετρινοσπάσματα, τοποθετούνται σε διαφορετικό σάκο από το υπόλοιπο και πλένονται σε υψηλή θερμοκρασία. Επιφάνειες στο δωμάτιο απολυμμένονται με γέλιμος χλωρίνης. Μετά από κάθε επαφή με τον ασθενή ή με αντικείμενά του, όπως και πριν και μετά από την προετοιμασία φυσική, πλένουμε καλά τα χέρια μας με σαφόν και νερό. Προφερνώνουμε με χειροκροτήτες μίας φοράς. Όλα τα μέλη της οικογένειας θεωρούνται στενές επαφές. Άρα πρέπει να μείνουν σε καραντίνα για 14 ημέρες και να παρακολουθούν την υγεία τους. Προστατεύουμε την κοινωνία, μένουμε στο σπίτι.
Το πρόγραμμα είναι κατάλληλο για άνω των 8 ετών.
'73 BC. The Roman Republic relies on a workforce of more than 1 million slaves. One Thracian gladiator, Spartacus, who seems to have been radicalized in his prisoner barracks, now decided to fight back. Right here, in ancient Capua, something was about to happen that would send shockwaves through the whole Republic. A day that not only forged the legend of one man, Spartacus, but I think dealt a mortal wound to the Roman Republic itself.
I will not share a cell with this Thracian pig.
I've always wanted a reason to kill you, Spartacus. Let's go. No. Free the others.
There isn't the time. Just the two of us. Answer it up, faith. Who will find us? They will always want us, Croesus. We are many. We can fight back.
Which way?
Whichever way we want.
We're
free.
Spartacus and 70 other gladiators broke out of the Capua Ludus. This band of runaways, rolling through these very hills and woods in southern Italy, would soon become a rebel army to challenge Rome. Plutarch tells us that they soon fell on a lightly guarded convoy of wagons.
Wait! Here.
A slave?
Yes. My name is Agnew.
Thracian?
You're gladiator.
You should join us.
You will be killed.
I don't think so.
Welcome.
This morning we were escaped slaves with nothing but kitchen knives. Now we're armed with robots and we've acquired a taste of freedom. The freedom Rome took away. Join us.
Welcome.
Won't you be able to?
We're told by Appian that Spartacus quickly made for the highest point in the landscape.
Spartacus and a few hundred of his followers camped out near the summit of Mount Vesuvius. Pursued and then trapped by Roman forces, they made a daring escape by turning wild vines into ropes and lowering themselves down behind the Roman soldiers, who they then massacred. Spartacus and his deeds of daring do were becoming the stuff that legends are made of. That summer of 73 BC, as word spread of Spartacus' revolt, more and more slaves left their fields and abandoned their masters to join him. First a trickle, and then a flood. Soon there were tens of thousands rampaging through the countryside, spreading terror and panic. For the Roman Republic, what started as a simple prison breakout had escalated with horrifying speed into something much more serious. A full-blown slave revolt.
What's more, we know from Appian that even some free men joined Spartacus.
At this time, around 90% of Italians lived and worked in the countryside, and many of them, herdsmen and farmers and shepherds, were dirt poor. Just 50 years before, this whole region had risen up against those that they thought of as the fat cats of the Republic, demanding their fair share of the spoils of Roman conquests. This was an army of the disgruntled, the desperate and the dispossessed, all malcontents with their own grievances against Rome. And it exposed the Republic to a chilling problem. That protest and the idea of freedom is contagious.
This was a critically serious challenge for Rome. And it's incredible when you think about it. Thousands of men, and probably women and children too, prepared to risk everything for the dream of freedom. I think this fundamental human desire caught Rome completely off guard. And there's another reason for Rome's sluggish response.
The toughest, most experienced legions are not there. Their strongest forces are out in the east, where all the riches of the Roman Empire still are, and they're out in Spain. I think they didn't think he would be such a military threat. But they were much more concerned with his moral threat to undermine the fabric of Roman society. Spartacus is a very frightening idea if you're a Roman.
A year after Spartacus's breakout, and after months of anarchy in southern Italy, Rome raised 4 legions, 20,000 soldiers, to take on Spartacus and his 40,000 rebels. Near Mount Gargano, the Romans intercepted a column commanded by Spartacus's right-hand man, Crixus, as it moved north.
The details of what happened next are pretty sketchy, but it's clear that the battle was an utter disaster for the rebels. 2/3 of the slave army were slaughtered, including Crixus himself.
With Rome's legions now converging on Spartacus, it's certain that, like Crixus, he'd be defeated, and the revolt brought to a bloody end. But the Romans didn't factor in his ability to exploit their predictable tactics.
A Roman army. There are thousands. It's more than we've ever faced. Faith.
There are Romans. They fight one way. We will use their strength and numbers against them. They won't see us coming. Many of them live to see us leave. And we can do this. You deliver a message. It's a Rome. We will never be slaves again.
Spartacus used speed and surprise to inflict a humiliating defeat on the legions. But Rome would never make peace with him. His breakout and the rebellion that had snowballed from that one day was a challenge to the Republic's authority that could not be tolerated. The Senate's response was to award emergency power to one of Rome's richest, most ambitious citizens, Marcus Licinius Crassus. When some of his soldiers ran away from a fight with Spartacus's rebels, his response was pitiless.
Do you know what disturbs me most about this rebel army? Not that these filthy slaves would page through Roman army. But that my own army allowed them to do so. Unchallenged.
Speak.
500 gutless cows, deserving of death.
Peace.
The problem is, if I kill them all, I have no army. They have learned nothing.
This was the brutal Roman practice of decimation, an extreme disciplinary measure in which 1 in every 10 men, chosen by lot, were beaten to death by their own comrades.
I swear there.
This is the gruesome origin of our own verb, to decimate, to take a tenth. It was a stark signal that with Crassus in charge, the Republic was no longer going to tolerate failure. But by giving so much power to one man, was Rome playing with fire? The day of Spartacus's breakout had led to a string of humiliating defeats for Rome and sent the Republic spiralling into crisis. The Senate, resorting to desperate measures, had awarded command to Marcus Licinius Crassus, a man whose ambition was only matched by his vast personal fortune. Crassus had been awarded sweeping emergency powers by the Senate and put at the head of a huge Roman army that this ambitious billionaire had largely paid for by himself. Now, this was a problem. The Roman Republic was full of checks and balances precisely to prevent powerful individuals turning themselves into dictators. But that day of Spartacus's breakout had thrown Rome into a panic. This unorthodox deal with Crassus was a massive gamble, and no one knew where it was going to end. The mighty Roman war machine was back on track, and in southern Italy, Spartacus was cornered once more, this time by Crassus. After 2 years of rebellion and battle, Spartacus's army, about 30,000 strong, squared up to Crassus's 40,000 in a final showdown with Rome.
I would not choose this day for battle, nor this place for battlefield. This is where fate is led. Bring me my horse.
Crassus was a formidable adversary, and Spartacus knew that he and his men could expect no mercy if they were defeated.
If we win today, I will have many horses to choose from. We lose, Crassus wins the day. I will have no need for a horse.
Plutarch tells us that in the heat of the battle, Spartacus risked everything on one mad, desperate charge straight towards Crassus. aftermath of the defeat, there was no "I am Spartacus" moment. That was a Hollywood invention. Instead, there was just typical, savage Roman retribution.
Good evening.
This is the Appian Way, and all along this road, from Rome to Capua, where it all began, Crassus crucified 6,000 of the surviving slave rebels. So that would have been a crucifixion every 30 yards or so for over 100 miles.
Good evening.
The thought of the cruelty and the suffering here is just sickening.
Good evening.
Spartacus and his men were dead. Slavery lived on. It was an essential part of the Roman economic system for 1,000 years, in which time an estimated 100 million people were seized and sold as slaves. The day of Spartacus's breakout might have inspired countless slaves, but it did little to change the system.
What I think made the Spartacus revolt such a crucial moment wasn't its impact on slavery, but its impact on Rome herself. For 2 years, the Roman Republic had been intimidated by an army of slaves and outsiders. For them, a horrifying inversion of the natural order of things. Spartacus had become a bogeyman, a demonic name used to frighten Roman children at night.
Rome's response had been to hand emergency powers to one ambitious individual, a dangerous precedent that came back to haunt them.
In time, the last traces of Roman people power would be swept away to be replaced by a single man, an all-powerful emperor. Spartacus's bid for freedom had set the clock ticking on the death of the Roman Republic itself.
Next time,
Pompey and I had an agreement.
the day that Rome was plunged into civil war, as Crassus was eclipsed by a new player, Gaius Julius Caesar.
Once we cross this river, there will be nothing